electronic. So we're here with Massimiliano Galli, and we're going to ask him a few questions about his career as a musician. And he's definitely dabbled a little bit into the electronic world as well. Massi, you've been in the music game for a while now. For what, 20 years?
Yeah, it's been a long journey so far. I started when I was a kid, typical story, like first bands, rock bands, playing in my city. I'm from Milan. It's a pretty important city in Italy. And all the most interesting music scene back then, in the 90s was all focused in Milan. Every musician was moving to Milan. It was kind of like the center. That was a bit replaced by Rome. So like Rome now is a bit more active, but it's also difficult for me to say because I just came back to Italy. So I've been away for a while. All the record label, all the major record labels, they all have their offices in Milan city center. So I guess it's still the center. So I started there, and it was 1994, I think, when I had my real first band.
Oh wow, yeah. Quite some time ago. Yeah, and you've since then you've had what, PostPrimtive, Rumori Dal Fondo. Hopefully I said that right.
Yes.
SignA and I.M.G.
PostPrimtive is the last thing. Like everything started with Rumori Dal Fondo, which is my Italian band. So, it's kind of like a Radiohead inspired project. So there are elements of rock, elements of electronic. We did a lot of work with strings arrangements too. So that was my Italian band. And so Italian lyrics, and obviously the band of name is an Italian name. So Rumori Dal Fondo is how you could, but you did pretty well. It was pretty correct. And that was the first thing where I really exposed myself as a songwriter. So I was doing my first songs. I was the lyricist. I was singing, because before my career, I was just like a guitarist, basically. And that project was very cool. Like the last album, we released it 2-3 years ago in 2019. The pandemic kind of shook a little bit my perception of time. So it's kind of like, I think it was 2019. And when we released it, the pandemic started. So we were planning to do a few shows, but then we had to stop, as pretty much everyone in the world. In the meantime, I moved back to Italy with my wife. And so a new life started. So that's the beginning. Then I moved to Ireland because of SignA, the other project you mentioned. And that was kind of like my favorite experiment, because was some folk guitars. I always mention Animal Collective as a reference for that project, because like the early Animal Collectives. I'm referring to Sung Tong album mostly, where they used guitars in a certain way, and combined with Nick Drake influences and German minimal techno influences too. So there were these two Italian guys with an acoustic guitar, and then two Irish guys like basically playing samples and stuff that we produced. And so the live experience of that project was very cool, because Irish people were looking at us as aliens, more or less, because we were kind of feeling a bit advanced for that audience too, because Irish music scene is very, it's very defined, and it's very, it's not too experimental. There is obviously a lot of amazing experimental acts, but I'm talking about big names. Big names are always a bit conventional.
Like Depeche Mode when they popped a drum machine on stage for the first time and got stared at a little bit.
Yeah. They're looking at you. They don't know if you are like serious, if you can or cannot play. Like it was very funny. And then these two, and then I.M.G was just me basically learning how to use drum machines. So I started these electronic based project, just myself at home. In electronic music you develop. So obviously the early works weren't sounding as I'm kind of a bit ashamed of those early works, but it was basically a human being Yeah, human being approaching, softwares and drum machines for the first time. So it was very free. It was like a big experiment, and I loved doing it. But now, obviously, I'm somewhere else. The very last thing I did is an album I did during the pandemic, because I was at home and I had time to focus, and it's called PostPrimtive and has lyrics by my close friend Daniele Idini, who is another Italian guy living in Ireland. He had a bunch of poetry that he made during the years. It's the collaboration between the two of us. I did all the musical part and he gave me the lyrics, and I produced it at home. So in the bedroom, the typical bedroom albums.
I think we're going to play Why Mother Have You Fallen off of your PostPrimtive album after the interview here. What drum machines were you using? Anything old school? Or
for PostPrimtive, I used all 808, because when I started doing electronic music, obviously these are all composed with the softwares, because otherwise I would be like in a different financial situation. If I could have all the real drum machine, man, like the people I work with. My producer has them. The guy I work with, Davide Ferrario, is an amazing musician, and he does electronic music too. I should probably send you some stuff. He does great electronic music. And it was also released by, I think, a couple of American labels from California, I guess, but I'm not too sure about that. But basically, he has the real drum machines. So I send him my MIDI parts that I use and I compose for the proper composition. I send it to him, and then you can, pass that through the real machine, and then the sound is better. I didn't do it in the case of PostPrimtive. PostPrimtive is basically software stuff. But based on the 808.
Yeah, nice. Some 808. That's why I like it.
When I started, I was always using 75 different drum machines, and I was like, this is not realistic. I can't have the snare drum of a 808 and then a lean drum for the hi-hat, So I said, this time I'm gonna approach like if you have the machine itself, and so there's you can't go anywhere else. You have to use those sounds and be a bit more realistic,
Yeah, it's good. Once you narrow it down too, I feel like that kind of helps your choices out, because it's not so expansive on what you can do.
Definitely, that's for sure. As I said again, if I could, I would have like my studio packed of stuff, but I'm not in that position. But let's say my career wasn't successful enough to allow me to do that.
It could be a real addiction, though. Once you start getting into buying these synths and drum machines, it makes a lot of people go broke.
That's an entire another universe. But yesterday, if you want to have a funny story about yesterday, we met this American guy. He just moved here close to us in the countryside, and he is planning to bring his modular synthesizer. He has this gigantic modular synthesizer. He wants to bring it from Texas to Italy. And I was like, good luck with that.
Yeah. Good luck. I don't even know if I've ever really played around with a modular, but
I didn't. So
no, it just seems like too much.
I didn't have the privilege yet, but who knows?
But not that I wouldn't love it, but yeah. So you've even done a movie soundtrack as well for that.
Yeah. That was another of my favorite things I did. That was with Rumori Dal Fondo, with my Italian band. We basically did a 3-hour jam session and recorded everything.
Oh, nice. That's how you did it.
And it was literally just we were just basically in this studio where everything was ready to record live, and I just gave my bandmates the idea that came out speaking with my friend, the director, Ru Paolini. Is an independent director here in Italy. We kind of had an idea in mind for how it should have sound, and we basically improvised for 3 hours, and then I just selected the best parts that the director liked, and he used it for the movie.
Nice. Nice. And what was the name of that movie?
It's L'Estraneo, which also could be the stranger, kind of like, it's kind of like someone you don't know. Let's say that. A stranger, yeah. The outsider is probably more accurate as an English translation for what the movie was about.
So out of all of these projects, it might be hard to decide, but what's been your favorite to work on so far?
Man, it's a very difficult question because like if you release something, most of the time is because you like it, and and sometimes sometimes it's not like that. But when the game is a bit bigger, when you have obligations and stuff that maybe you're dealing with labels and you have some certain obligations to respect, and maybe you say, okay, you know what, it's not my favorite work ever, but I'm gonna release it anyway because I'm forced to.
Yeah.
There are many examples in the music history about this.
Stress.
But for me, like maybe my favorite is SignA because I wasn't the only responsible, because all the other projects were all on me. Even though Rumori Dal Fondo had many musicians, but I was always the songwriter, I was always the driving force to do things. I was kind of writing the music myself and the lyrics myself. So the other musicians' contribution in terms of composition was kind of like very little. They contributed with ideas and arrangements, and I'm eternally grateful for that. But I was, it was me basically. It's a solo project. And SignA instead was the two of us, myself and Stefano Schiavocampo, which is even more complicated than my name to pronounce.
I won't attempt that.
Let's call him Steph.
Steph.
So it was me and Steph, and let's say, it was 50% each responsibility. So that's why I always say that's my favorite, because I have less responsibility for that.
For those that are into working with others and possibly even having bands, what advice do you have to kind of make sure ideas mesh well and you get along with, your co-producers?
I never had an answer for this, but now I do. So you're pretty lucky. No, like we were in the States 2 weeks ago, and in upper New York State, and I met a 20 years old guy on the river, just randomly. We were just there watching the sunset with my wife, and I see this bunch of kids fishing in the river, and funny enough, I just go close, and I'm expecting, these new generations that don't even know the music we listen to, and they only know, I don't know, new names and trap and stuff like that, and EDM and Skrillex. Skrillex is probably already too old even for them.
Yeah, well, that's when America kind of got into that stuff.
Yeah, and this guy, I fell in love with this guy because he was like 20 years old, super enthusiastic, and I was like, no, but I love Radiohead. And he had 3 Radiohead tattoos on his skin. Like he showed me on his arm, his tattoo. And he was like, no, because my dream is to play, blah, blah, blah. And we were talking about this question you just made. And I think the best tip is just always, you have to be in love with the people you play with. You have to have these special, like, I had this special magic with very few musicians in these 20 years. I had great experiences, but the magic that you can experience, where like you don't need to tell anyone what to do and it's already happening. That's the magic I'm talking about.
When it's just
so that's my
flow.
That's my biggest tip that I can give for musicians. Like, you need to be extremely happy at what you're doing and proud, and you don't need to explain yourself too much to your band members.
Yeah, that's good advice.
So, yeah, I think it took me a long time to arrive to this. I'm getting old, dear Stuart.
Well, with age comes wisdom, usually. Yeah. Hopefully,
yeah.
So what if you've mentioned Radiohead? What are maybe some more of your inspirations for music?
Well, that's so when I was talking about this labels and record labels and contract, like the best example come to my mind as one of my biggest inspiration, but that I reached not too soon in my life, but just like, let's say 10, 15 years ago. Talk Talk.
Great choice. Yeah.
Talk Talk is especially, the last two albums that they released that are like basically this kind of imprinting for post rock, like everything that you know by Slowdive, Mogwai, Sigur Rós, and many bands like that comes from where Talk Talk ended, which sounds pretty nuts. If you know only It's My Life and all the big hits,
Yeah, and then
it's
that's not
quite
really different from
it's quite surprising.
Yeah.
It's quite surprising to find out that they went in a completely different direction. Mark Hollis fell in love with the silence, and so he did these very dilated pieces, ambient almost. Not ambient, because that's an entire other story, but like, yeah, it's hard to describe. You should check it out if you like quite inspiring music. You should definitely listen to Spirit of Eden and Laughing Stock, who are two great albums. Because, for me, music inspiration is about like your approach to it. That's why Radiohead is one of my biggest, influence, and Aphex Twin. I like musicians that combine elements and they shake them together and it comes out something that is a mix and a combination of things. That's my biggest inspiration.
Big sound salad. Okay, so Massi, I know you're familiar with the age of hip hop electronic, the 1970s, 1980s, basically. What would you say are some of your favorite tracks from that era?
It's a period I'm exploring a lot, and there are incredible albums from the krautrock music scene, from like the ambient music school, and it's all in between the period of, the early 70s and the late 80s. I'm a huge fan of Cluster, Harmonia, all the krautrock music scene. I love the track Caramel by Cluster a lot in that album. Sucker's Side, it's one of the best albums of the 70s. I like the collaborations between David Byrne and Brian Eno. There's a lot of, gems in that period.
You're just getting the tip of the iceberg, I know, but yeah. And you're pretty good friends with Michael Rother too, right?
I'm not, unfortunately, but I've been tagged by him. He was thanking me for something I wrote about their album. So that was kind of like the highlight of 2020, or the highlight of the pandemic, being appreciated by like a pretty much a music legend like Michael Rother.
Definitely appropriate word for someone like that. So one last question. What do you like to do with some of your free time outside of music?
Oh, that's a much easier question. Much easier. Yeah, it's basically what I'm doing now. Like, I moved to the countryside. I think it was time for me to have a big change, and the pandemic, I'm one of the few people that took it as a very positive thing in the first place, of course, with all the due respect to who lost people, and I did. So like my family lost someone, so obviously no offense to anyone, but that was, for me, was kind of like, hey, maybe this could be the punch in the face that's gonna wake up our collective understanding of how this society is kind of broken. And maybe it's gonna be like something that's gonna inspire our, governments and people in position of power to change something and invest in a more sustainable existence, because we have all the tools to do it, but we don't, because it's not convenient to who is, yeah, like who is in position of power doesn't have all that interest, but it's totally doable. Like, I mean, there are so many new technologies that it could change a lot this planet. But since the planet didn't change and it actually became even a worse place, I was like, okay, you know what? I'm gonna do it myself. So I moved to the countryside, living my new sustainable life, and I look after the garden. I never had a garden in my life because I was always in cities paying a ridiculous amount of money for rents and stuff like that. And so like the possibility to work remotely was a big reason why we chose to move, and I think that's what I like to do in my free time now. But I'm planning stuff. I'm even planning to do a new Rumori Dal Fondo album because I'm back in Italy. So I think there is this kind of like, it's in the air. I'm talking with my drummer Mattia. He's a great drummer, and we are talking about it. We are kind of like, yeah, we like, you know, with a completely different approach. Like, we made albums to become successful. Now we make albums just to and we obviously failed. And now we just do it because of, you know, just for the love of doing it, because you need to express yourself. You always need to do it.
At the end of the day, that's what's going to be left.
Yeah, you need to do it. You need to express yourself always, as much as you can. Choose your, you know, the form of art you prefer, but do it. You know, it can be writing, painting, whatever it is. It's a great thing also for your mental health. You know, it helps you to
a lot.
It helps you to think about your problems and see them from another perspective.
Yeah, I just actually read something about how important it was. Is in that David Byrne book, How Music is Made, and he was just talking about how it's art and music has been kind of stripped out of American education, and it's.
I still haven't read it. I still haven't
finished it. I still have 100 pages.
It's a pretty. He had a lot to say. He had what's that, like 3,000 pages or something?
No,
like,
not quite. It's probably like 400, but you know.
Only 400? Okay.
Maybe it might be 5. It's pretty small text though.
So. Maybe the Italian version was 8,000 because we use way more words in Italian.
Maybe. Yeah, lots of different words in other languages that we don't have in English.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was just talking about how like art and music is so important for problem solving and expression that things like biology and mathematics don't cover because they've got rules and you follow them. You know, you don't.
Yeah, until they find new rules, and then everything they say, oh, everything we said till 10 minutes ago was actually based on wrong formulas.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, yeah, that's not actually that healthy. But yeah, exactly. Well, okay, I think that's all we have for today. We'll get into that song from your PostPrimtive album, Why Mother Have You Fallen. Do you want to say anything about the track before we play it?
It's a good pick because it's probably one of the most direct songs of the album, and I hope you enjoy. Like, that's all I can say, I guess.
All right. Well, thanks for your time today, Massi. Appreciate it. It's been a
pleasure, Stuart. Always a pleasure.